Welcome to another episode of HBOT Insider. And today we just did a nice little breath work class, and so my mind is clear, my body's relaxed, and it made me think of a couple of things about how oxygen works, how hyperbaric chamber works, and I think I came up with a nice little explanation. So first thing we have to understand is how oxygen gets to the tissues of our body. When you breathe in, the dome-shaped diaphragm muscle contracts, it flattens out, creating a negative pressure inside the lungs, which sucks the air in from the outside. Once in the lungs, it may only exist inside the bigger tubes, the bronchioles, the bronchial tubes, but if you can take a deep enough breath, it'll get all the way to the end where the alveoli are. Once the air is in the alveoli, the oxygen and carbon dioxide will exchange with the blood system. If you're not taking a deep enough breath, you're not getting that exchange because none of that air is moving. So first thing that's important with effective breathing is getting a deep enough breath to move the air deep inside the lungs. Once that oxygen is transported into the bloodstream, it's picked up by your red blood cells. The more oxygen that attaches to a red blood cell, the easier it becomes to attach more oxygen to the red blood cell. So each hemoglobin protein can hold 4 oxygen molecules. As the first oxygen molecule attaches, the hemoglobin relaxes. It's kind of like saying, oh my goodness, I don't have any oxygen. I got to go find an oxygen. So it kind of freaks out to get the first one. Once it has the first one, it relaxes a little bit and makes it easier to bind the second one. And as it gets the second one, it's even easier to bind the third and even easier to bind the fourth. Well, if it's easier to bind the third and the fourth, it's also easier to offload the fourth and the third when it gets to the tissues. So I like to make analogies, and one of the analogies I like to talk about with oxygen is money. We all want it. We all struggle to get it. But once we start to get it, you start doing different things with it. So think about your paycheck. If I was to give you more today, what would you do different? Probably nothing. If I gave you more all week, what would you do? Still, probably not much different. But if I gave you more money all month, you'd start paying more bills, you'd start relaxing a little bit, you'd start breathing a little more easily, but you would start to be able to look around and decide what to do with your money. If I gave you more money all year, by that point now you're looking to buy more cars, houses, and yachts. Hemoglobin does the same thing. Once it has 3 and 4 oxygen molecules binded to it, it just starts to hand them out to the cells like free money. That's why doing breath work allows you to feel better, because you are making sure that 1, you're breathing deep enough to get the air all the way down to the alveoli, and number 2, you're over concentrating the hemoglobin to make sure that it's maxed out. Now, what does hyperbarics do? Hyperbarics is applying pressure. The more pressure I apply, the more bubbles I can dissolve. So what do we get when we do hyperbarics? Well, we have what's known as the oxygen dissociation curve. Basically, this says that for any given concentration of oxygen, the hemoglobin will saturate itself to a certain point. Now, if you notice, the top of the curve is pretty flat. So whether you have 3 or 4 molecules of oxygen attached, it's pretty close to 100%. In fact, you have to get down to 50% to just get close to 80% of saturation of the hemoglobin. So 80% of the hemoglobin will have all of its oxygen, even when you're only at 50% of a concentration of oxygen. What happens as we start to move to less concentration from there is a steep drop-off. And now the body starts to freak out. The hemoglobin won't let go of that oxygen. See, when you get down to the bottom, you're looking at how much oxygen is the hemoglobin willing to let go to the tissues. So when you get down to, say, 25% of an oxygen concentration, your hemoglobin doesn't want to let go of that oxygen. If we do hyperbarics and we increase our pressure, it's like shifting the curve to the right. we've added so much concentration that for every particular concentration, your hemoglobin is more willing to let go of the oxygen. Now, it's not because it's got more concentration, it's still the same concentration. However, more hemoglobin is willing to let it go. That's because it knows that as soon as it swings back around to the lungs, there's plenty more to pick up. So your red blood cells are a delivery system. If I can shift the concentration of oxygen higher, the delivery system can run faster and more efficiently. If it's more willing to drop off the oxygen, then more cells get oxygen. Hyperbaric oxygen continues to dissolve oxygen into the plasma. Therefore, it's free and clear of the hemoglobin already, which means it's immediately available for every cell to take it. And if we can get to higher pressures, there is so much oxygen dissolved in the plasma that you almost don't even need the red blood cells. In fact, a study was done many years ago, which they don't do anymore, is they took all the red blood cells out of pigs that were at 3.0 atmospheres. At that pressure, so much oxygen is dissolved into the plasma that you don't need red blood cells. So they took them out, and pigs were fine. Then they put the red blood cells back in, took them out of the chamber, and again, perfectly fine. So hyperbarics is a way of increasing the concentration of oxygen. One, to either shift the curve and allow the hemoglobin to be more willing to let go of the oxygen, but also to dissolve it directly into the plasma. If you don't have a hyperbaric chamber, just breathe. But breathe more deeply. Make sure you are getting that oxygen all the way down to the alveoli in your lungs to make sure it's making a good exchange with the blood vessels. After you've made that exchange, make sure you are moving the area that needs to be moved. If it's your organs, just relax. They take about 60% of the blood supply when you're resting. But if it's musculoskeletal, if it's a body part that's injured, you have to move that body part to drive the blood flow to that area. Otherwise, it doesn't matter how much you saturate your plasma or your red blood cells, if they're not going to that area, it's not going to help. So integrated hyperbarics takes hyperbaric oxygen and saturates your plasma to the maximum amount we can. And then we integrate movements, exercises. We use infrared lights. All of this to heat up the tissue, to move the muscles and drive that blood flow to the area that it's needed, making sure that the hemoglobin and the plasma are delivering that oxygen where it's needed. Hope you guys learned something today. Have a great one.